So welcome to this month's Wildcatalyst seminar. My name is Chelsea DiGiuseppe. I'm the marketing manager for UNHInnovation. Thanks for coming. So this year, our Wildcatalyst seminar series theme is launching research-based startups. So our aim is to help demystify the startup process and explore the opportunities, the challenges, pitfalls, and others of launching a business by hearing about real-life successes from the entrepreneurs and innovators themselves. So while the general topics of this will be universal to all entrepreneurial-minded individuals, there is going to be an emphasis on starting a business around university research-born innovations. And we are excited to explore this intersection of entrepreneurship and academia. So next month, we'll actually be having our annual holiday networking party. So there won't be a speaker, but we'll have door prizes, great food, great networking conversation with people from the university and people outside the university, students. So we invite you to join us for that. The invitations will probably be coming out next week. And if you don't get our invitations yet, or our email blasts, there's a sign-up sheet on the registration table. So if you just sign your name, we'll add you to the list. So before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors this year. We have Hamilton Brooks Smith Reynolds, and they're a Boston-based full-service intellectual property law firm. We have Finch & Maloney, a Manchester-based law firm that provides intellectual property counseling and services to technology companies. And we have Saunders & Silverstein, a law firm in Amesbury, Mass. that provides services related to trademarks, copyrights, internet, software, and entertainment law. So following our presentation today, we will have some networking time, and we have great food and drinks, so help yourself. We just want to remind you, if you're not 21, please abstain from the alcoholic beverages. We appreciate that. Oh, and if you are an I2 Passport student, I just want to remind you to swipe in at the kiosk at the registration table. And thank you for coming. All right, to introduce our speaker tonight, we have Dr. Eric Fossum. Dr. Fossum is a professor and Associate Provost for Entrepreneurship and Technology Transfer at Dartmouth College. So all of you, I'm sure, use a smart device with a camera on it, and you have that, at least in part, to thank Dr. Fossum for that. While working at NASA, he invented the image sensor that's used on billions of smart device cameras around the world today. So thank you. We appreciate that.
The father of the selfie?
So he's a serial entrepreneur. He holds over 160 U.S. patents. He was a charter founder of the National Academy of Inventors. So he was in the initial class of inventors in 2012 that started that academy. And just this year, he won the 2007 Queen Elizabeth Prize, which is the world's largest engineering prize. So that's really impressive. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Fossum. I'm really excited to hear about your career and your experience.
Great.
So it's a pleasure to be here. I see you guys are getting seats back there. That's good. Although it's feels really good to see people standing in the back, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, why not? But really, it's better to sit down. So well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about kind of a meandering story, both on the CMOS image sensor, invention, and technology, a little bit of technology in there. Talk about how that company kind of got started, entrepreneurial arc also that we went through. So that's a nice story in itself, and as Chelsea said, that you've all got my technology in your pocket for sure. At least probably almost all of you have at least two cameras using my technology in your pocket, front and back facing cameras. By the way, that was just so you know, that license agreement was a fixed price licensing agreement. I don't get something for every camera. My wife thinks I should be getting just 1/100th of a penny for every picture that's taken. But if it did, I would have come down on my helicopter instead. But anyway, And then I'll also talk about the newer stuff I'm working on as well, because we just rolled a company out for that just a few months ago, and tell you what we're doing. So I don't know if I can keep you all entertained all the time, but hopefully I can keep all of you entertained part of the time. That's my goal. Okay, so, and there is no wall clock or anything in here, so.
I'll give you the 10-minute sort of.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm gonna forget that here, but anyway, so, this is one of my favorite photographs, as it turns out, the range of light. Ansel Adams, here he is with his portable camera. Doing that. Of course, these days, if you go into Yosemite or something, this is what you see. Everybody takes pictures with their smartphone. There are about 4 billion cameras that were made with this technology, CMOS image sensor technology, in 2016. So if you kind of figure that out, that works out to be about 120 cameras per second, 24/7, that are coming off of some hypothetical conveyor belt, which is sort of amazing. The other side of that, by the way, which is a problem still to be solved, is that there's another conveyor belt that's taking about 120 cameras per second into landfill. So we still need to figure that part of the puzzle out. But anyway, lots. If you look at the number of pictures uploaded per day, I got this data off the web. And then, being a good engineer, I decided to plot that on a semi-log plot. And it's amazingly linear. And if you extrapolate that out, that's somewhere on the order of about 10 billion photos per day uploaded through the internet. 10 billion per day. It's also kind of mind-boggling. I don't know what everybody's taking a picture of. A lot of them are selfies, I think. And that's, about 1.2 trillion photos per year. And that's not even counting video uploads. I read somewhere that there's a couple of hours of video uploaded every second to YouTube.
I think it's 300 hours a minute.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Okay, so there are many kinds of digital cameras. Of course, the killer app for the technology is a smartphone. That's a large part of the sales, but there's big DSLRs and point and shoots and webcams. Dental x-ray cameras was an early application that we actually worked on. And now it's pretty much, how many of you have gone to the dentist and they've used a solid state camera for your instead of film? A lot, right? It's pretty much ubiquitous. We also worked on the very early pill cameras with a company in Israel that it was some former missile engineers that decided to retread themselves, and they thought about the little missile that goes through your intestines to take pictures, but they didn't have a technology to do that until the CMOS technology came along, just because of its low power. It has to run on a really tiny battery. That's become pretty commonplace, and of course there are other applications as well. Can you hear me back there okay? So okay. I'll try to speak louder, but I don't know how long my voice will last.
What's the one on the bottom?
That's a police camera, body camera. Oh, bottom center is like a rear backup camera for a car, which are not required, I think. I'm going to talk about this CMOS image sensor invention a little bit, and then the current work on the quantum image sensor. So I went to Trinity and Hartford and Yale. Then I taught at Columbia for the early part of my career. And then I was made an offer by NASA I couldn't refuse to go out and work for a space program out at JPL. Oddly enough, I was at JPL Monday. It was the first time I'd gone back to give a talk after leaving there in 1996, so it was kind of a certain irony there. So, and I think most of you know this already, but this is kind of ARC for entrepreneurship. And usually in a university, we've got this invention or discovery phase down here that sometimes you invent something that you didn't know you were inventing it, kind of serendipity. Other times you're solving a problem, which is most of the time, and that's the mother of necessity kind of adage that you have invented something. Or sometimes you discover something as well. I use this phrase because I run the Ph.D. innovation program at Dartmouth also. So what does innovation mean to me? It's the process of translating a discovery or invention into a good or service that somebody's going to pay for eventually. I'd say innovation is probably like the most overused word in academia today. So we need another word so we sound innovative. So then there's a startup enterprise, and I think that in this today we're kind of talking about the connection between these two things. But in fact, there's an arc that goes up to later stage enterprises that are bigger, somewhat slower, somewhat conforming. I remember when we started our company, it was like, we don't need no stinking rules, right? In fact, it was like, you want a beer? We have beer in the refrigerator, no problem. Then a year or so went by, we grew to 30 or 40 people, and I was taking a customer around through our engineering offices and came to an engineer I was looking for. He wasn't at his desk, but there was a half-open can of beer on the desk at that time. And I realized, oh, I guess we need a rule. And you go through these things, and all of a sudden you realize where all these rules come from in larger organizations that you've worked for, perhaps, or encountered. And it just kind of grows automatically, usually because something bad has happened. That's out here. The other bad thing that happens is if you have a really good idea, the competitors come out. And they will invest, they have a lot deeper pockets, they will invest a lot of money and do what they can do to take over the business that you have illuminated with your new technology. They usually don't care about licensing or anything. It's kind of like, well, go ahead, sue us if you want. There's a good chance that you're using something that we control, so we're going to countersue, by the way, and tie you up in court for a long time. It gets really ugly fast. You have to be very careful about this, and really the only way to deal with these big competitors that come out is to try to be as nimble as you can and stay ahead of them as long as you can, because they are big, but they're kind of lumbering at the same time, so they can't go too fast. I said all that, but I can tell you one exception, Samsung. They are like the fastest following company I've ever seen, and I also worked with them for 3 or 4 years, and they're really, really fast, because when they decide they want to do something, they put a lot of people, right? When I was working at Samsung, I was reading how many people they were hiring for the next year. They were doing their college recruiting. They had 25,000 openings that they were hiring for. These are fresh outs. So I mean, it's just like massive company, really. They decide they want to do something, you're in trouble. So yeah, gets a little iffy out there. This is, in my opinion, this is a good time to sell, okay? And let somebody else worry about the headache, or get acquired by a Samsung or something like that if you can. Okay, so my story, of course, is pretty old now, but kind of goes from 1992 to 2002. In this case, from the first demonstration of a working device after the invention, to transfer to U.S. industry, creating a company, leaving JPL, which was scary, and then growing the company, and then finally selling out down the road when it looked like those big competitors were going to come out of the woodwork. So, okay, so back to going to JPL. So JPL's mission, Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, their mission, our mission at that time, of course, was building these robotic spacecraft to explore the solar system and to some extent the Earth as well, and comets and things like that. So in the 70s, Voyager is a pretty well-known spacecraft that was built at JPL. There's 2 spacecraft built. They went out, took some fantastic pictures. There's a mock-up of, not a mock-up, this was actually a spare set of equipment that was built, sort of a third Voyager, if you will. And of course, well, if you've seen The Martian, you know why. Because things go wrong out in space, and it's good to have like the real thing in the lab to play around with so you can figure out what's going on. So we did that. And just by the way, the director of JPL actually dresses very nicely compared to the movie The Martian. Just want to set that straight. Anyway, this is the camera that flew on Voyager. It's quite large, bigger than a bread box for sure. That used a Vidicon camera tube device. So that was the technology at that time. In 1969, the ChargeCoupled Device was invented, and that's the solid-state image sensor that was then used for quite a while. I won't go through how it works, but I can answer questions later if you want. But it's essentially shifting charge along many, many steps to get it from where it was generated by light to an amplifier. It turned out it was quite a good invention and helped with a lot of astronomy. It helped out a lot of astronomers, so they kind of rallied to get Smith and Boyle the Nobel Prize in physics, even though it was kind of an engineering thing. Physics in 2009. There's only one little problem, and that the citation was for the invention of an imaging semiconductor circuit, the CCD sensor. It turns out that they didn't actually invent an image sensor. They invented the CCD. Mike Thompson, who came into that group at about the same time, actually literally has the invention, a patent on image sensor based on the CCD. So not that they didn't deserve the Nobel Prize, but it's unfortunate for Mike that that was a citation, because he felt that that was his invention, in fact. Smith is still alive. Boyle has passed away. The Galileo camera in 1989, which went out to Jupiter, had CCD cameras, like an 800 by 800 pixel camera, pixel sensor. The camera mass is about 30 kilograms. Part of that was the optics, of course. Power is 15 watts, so kind of big, burned a lot of power. In 1997, Cassini went out, and there's people down here. This is the Cassini spacecraft. And I like to think of this as a spacecraft that kind of broke the back of NASA, because to build, well, first of all, you have to propose to do an instrument like this. It's very expensive. And that takes a lot of years of wrangling to finally get funding assigned to that by Congress. And then it takes a lot of years to build. Usually you have to wait for a while for the launch window. And then it flies for years to get to its destination. And then you start taking data, and then you have to analyze it. It's most of your career, in fact, if you're a planetary scientist. And it's very, very expensive for all the people and the time and everything, a lot of risk, all in one package. So NASA kind of moved away from that. By the way, this is the camera on Cassini, even bigger. It's only, it was a megapixel, but it's a 30-watt camera and 60 kilograms of mass. So 60 kilograms is, you really wouldn't want to pick one of those up. Okay, also just recently, just in the last couple months, Cassini was deorbited and has burned up in Saturn's atmosphere. Sorry. So about that time frame, Dan Golda came into NASA and said we need to do things faster, better, cheaper. So we need to miniaturize cameras on future spacecraft. And a lot of reasons for that, which you can read here right away, but also try to improve the turnaround time for these missions. So this was the mother of invention, okay, this need to miniaturize cameras on spacecraft. So the CCD device that the Nobel Prize went for was just a chip. It's not very big, but unfortunately the way a CCD works is you need a lot of other electronics to support that chip, both to send control signals to it and to also process the data that comes out. And so that's why these cameras tend to be so big. So if you want to make something smaller, the obvious thing to do is, we want to integrate all the electronics on a single chip. So that's kind of a no-brainer. But the trouble is, how do you still get the high-quality image that you're getting from CCDs when you don't use a CCD process anymore? And that was the hard part. So our approach was actually to use what was the best thing about the CCD, like what made it work so well, which had to do with complete charge transfer and correlated double sampling. Another thing I'm happy to explain later if you like. But the main thing is that if we could sort of do the measurement of the number of electrons accurately inside the pixel and have the amplifier inside the pixel, we don't have to shift the charge thousands of times to get it out of the output amplifier. And that means that we could use a conventional CMOS process now to build the pixels, build the image sensor. If we do that, we can start talking about integrating all the rest of the logic, analog to digital converters and all that sort of thing on the same chip. This is a kind of a block diagram of a CMOS image sensor. We have color filters over the pixels, which is was used in CCDs and still used today. Typically 2 greens, a red and a blue for each kernel. But then also these A to D converters. It could be lots of different architectures for how we do that as well. So if we integrate all that stuff onto a chip now, we can basically build a really tiny camera. So the essence was, how can you build a good pixel in the image sensor? That was the invention. And there's a number of patents around that. So I didn't do this myself. I was working with a team. I had a higher level management position at JPL. I was in charge of the technology R&D for about 200 engineers. But coming from a research position at Columbia, I felt like that was too boring in a way. I still had my own ideas. So I actually started my own group, and this is part of the group that I started. So it was like having 2 different management positions at the same time. So this was kind of my playground area, and a lot of these people helped explore those ideas and make it a reality. So after we demonstrated this thing, it was really clear that the technology would be useful here on Earth, not just up in space. So here we were working for JPL is part of Caltech, but we're also this federally funded R&D center, and we're paid for by taxpayers. So what should we do? We should try to get this technology out of JPL, it's a tech transfer process, and get it in the hands of US industry. Well, what does that really mean? It means that I went out around to all these different companies trying to convince them, explain the technology and convince them that the CCD, which was now made almost entirely in Japan, could be replaced by this technology and it could be made in the US. Because CCD required some special sauce that only the Japanese knew how to do by that point in time, but this we could pick up in the US. Unfortunately, most of those companies I talked to, they were kind of interested, dabbled with it a little bit, but not really that gung-ho, not ready to commit. We did get some early interest. We signed a technology cooperation agreement with Bell Labs. Ironic, because that's where the CCD was invented. So we're going to transfer this new technology back to them. Kodak, and we know how that turned out. And then a 3-person startup company that was working on dental radiography, those dental sensors, and they really pioneered that area. So Kodak, they were there right at the very beginning for the CMOS image sensor technology. And all the engineers that worked in that area were really quite happy to work on this. It was a much higher level inside Kodak that said, you know what, we're a chemical company, so we're the chemicals in this. And if you are successful, you're going to ruin our chemical business. So there was kind of they had kind of a schizophrenia at Kodak. So they had the R&D team that was doing something new, and they had the rest of the management team that was old school in the chemistry side that really saw this as a threat to their business, not recognizing that this was a new kind of business, in fact, would be the business in photography in just a few years. So there's a bunch of case stories already written about this. I got to see it firsthand myself. So it's nothing to do with the engineers over at Kodak. It really was higher level management. Bell Labs, frankly, it made a mistake here. When we thought we were transferring this technology to Bell Labs, we thought we were doing something fantastic. Here was the famous Bell Labs, and they were taking our technology. But what I didn't realize is that at Bell Labs, they're also a research place, and they have to transfer the technology to someplace like Western Electric in order to commercialize it. So we weren't really talking to the end user or end customer of that technology. We were actually talking to an intermediary. And so even though we did a great job of transferring it to Bell Labs didn't really care too much if they were transferring it successfully to the next party. So that kind of ended that way. We also transferred it to National, Motorola, Intel, EG&G, Redicon, but those were back burner kind of things for those companies. So at the end, we were very frustrated, so we decided, you know what, if this isn't going to work with other companies, we're going to start a company ourselves. So myself, Sabrina Kemeny, Nick Dudamopoulos, and Bob Nixon, all in the core group at the JPL, we started a company. Actually, Sabrina, who I was married to at that time anyway, she was home with our second child, okay, on maternity leave. And it was like, I had all this interest coming in about this technology, and it was like, we should start a company, we should just get a little CAD design tool at home, and Sabrina, in your spare time, you can like design chips. Okay, that was like such a bad idea on many levels, but it actually worked in a way, okay? And so she was really responsible for starting the company in many ways. Hey, we started literally in the classic story, in the basement of our home, and I stayed with my paying job at JPL. And then every day I would leave to go to JPL, and a couple of people all men, would drive up to the house, and they would go into the house. And then they would leave, and then I would come home. Okay, it was a little weird. A couple neighbors commented on that. It only took a moment to explain what was going on, but also kind of weird. Anyway, but then quickly we outgrew that space and then moved into some regular office space. Another thing that happened that was uncontrolled, which is luck. And I have to explain this to people because a lot of engineers don't quite get this, because usually in engineering you do step A, B, C, and D, and you figure if you do all these steps successfully, you're going to be successful at the project that you're working on. But in fact, in business, luck has a lot to do with it. It's like timing and other things that you can't control at all. In our case, a reporter from Business Week came to JPL, had no plan to visit my lab, but had some extra time, and someone said, oh, you should go see what Fossum is doing in his lab. So the reporter came down at the end of the day and just to see what we were doing, got very interested in it, and then wound up writing a 2-page article in Business Week. And just before, he was like going through a couple things with me, and I said, do you mind, we just started this company, would you mind mentioning it in your article? And he's like, oh, sure, I can do that. And you just can't buy something like that, okay? It was just like pure luck that happened that way. So that was just about a month or two after we started the company. And we didn't even have a phone number for the company. It was like about 2 days before, all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, there's like no number. If someone calls information, which is what you had to do in those days, there'll be no listing. So we had like hustle to try to get a phone number for the company. So again, not like good planning, just basic business, like get a phone number for the company early on. Okay, anyway, so that worked out pretty well. By the way, this is a mock-up of a camera. This is what I thought someday, if things worked out the way they should, we should be able to make a camera that size. So this was machined out of a piece of aluminum, painted black, a little hole in the front, make it look like a camera. I mean, we didn't fool anybody. We said it's a mock-up camera, but ironically, or luckily, it turned out that we could actually do that. So we say now that the company was spun off from JPL, but in fact, it's a very loose term, because Caltech had never licensed a technology that came out of JPL before. especially not to the inventors. So it was like a really big barrier to get them to license us, the inventors, the technology we had invented. The reason why is that JPL was worried, because they're on this big NASA contract, that somehow they would look like a big conflict of interest if they licensed the actual inventors. Like somehow we had the inside track and took advantage of it, and JPL did not offer this technology to 1,000 other people and then pick the best bidder or something like that. So fortunately inside Caltech there was a guy, Larry Gilbert, who kind of pushed this pretty hard inside Caltech, and they finally granted Photobit a license. So there was no organized plan to spin off the company. Some people were very supportive, as I mentioned, and some were definitely not supportive. And then after you start a company, you got to hire people, right? Especially if you're successful. It's like, well, where do you go to? You go back to the well to like hire everybody else that you've trained already on this technology. Well, it's good from the company's point of view, not so good from JPL's point of view. But anyway, it was fair and reasonable, I think, in the end. And the other thing you learn is that success has many mothers and fathers in the end. After you're successful, people come out and say, oh yes, I was a key part of that success. I'll also mention it's like there was a long perspiration phase with a lot of stress for a lot of years. So from 1995 to 2001, we grew to about 135 people, mostly self-funded with custom design contracts. Got a lot of support from SBR programs. Then we took investment from strategic business partners, not venture capitalists, but strategic business partners, which I strongly recommend for anybody that's starting a company looking for cash. And then also I had to file about 100 new patent applications. So you might have the original inventions are good for like kind of foundational IP, but when you go to make a product, you usually need a lot more development and a lot more intellectual property protection, which is just something you have to count on. Also very expensive. So there's, there we are in Pasadena around 2000. Miller time, in 2001, we sold the company to Micron. The license went back to Caltech. But also by 2001, which is one of the reasons why we sold it, is that there were a lot of competitors emerging, like Toshiba and ST Micro, Sony, Samsung, which are now number 1 and number 2 in the business. So after we sold it, of course, then that was 2001. Now it's 2017. There's been a lot of people around the world, thousands of engineers around the world that have made this technology so successful. Sales were about $10 billion last year for the semiconductor part. That's not the whole camera, that's just the chip part. Caltech, once they got the license back, successfully enforced its patents against all the major players. I don't know the exact number, but I think Caltech earned about $150 million in revenue from licensing income on this technology. Fortunately, they have a trickle-down policy to their inventors. And let me say, first of all, it's trickle-down, just to get your expectations set the right way. Also, they sued with 6 of my patents, all the big players. But when it came time to cutting a deal, they licensed this giant portfolio. Anything that had to do with imaging at JPL was in that portfolio. So what does that mean? As an inventor, you're basically diluted, heavily diluted in this portfolio as far as trickle down goes. So I'm not complaining, I did fine, but you have to be also prepared for the fact that you might be the hammer, but in the end you get, you know, just a few grains of the feed corn. But guess what? Like that little mock-up camera I showed, this is what cameras actually look like today. And this is an endoscopy camera, by the way. So if you've ever had a camera inserted in your body, be glad it's that size. That's all I can say for sure. This is just kind of the genealogy of different companies. Our company, Photobit, we sold to Micron. Micron then spun that out as a division, Aptina Imaging. Then Aptina was acquired by onsemi, so it's gone through a lot of phases. And there's the other companies as well. Somebody mentioned a group in Edinburgh, probably VLSI Vision, that was bought by ST Micro. So I think if you're a faculty member and you're thinking about starting up a company, you need to decide if you want to be the CEO or not. And it depends on your personality. I needed to be the CEO because I like to control things. Okay, I want to do it my way. I'm not really content to do it somebody else's way. But what that meant was, A, it was not optimal because I didn't know anything about business when we started. I had a lot to learn, made some mistakes, a lot of mistakes along the way. But on the other hand, business skills are not rocket science. You can learn them. They're quite easy, especially if you're coming from a quantitative field. Most business things are pretty easy to learn, but you have to put the effort into learning them. And they're different from science and academia, okay? One of the things is that business is not collegial, okay? People aren't nice to you. If they're getting something from you, they'll be nice to you, but it's for their own gain. And so you always have to be kind of on the lookout that, like, you have to do deals, that means you have to cooperate, but at the same time, you have to be very wary of the fact that they want to eat your lunch as best they can. It's like dealing with Apple, for example. All the consumers think Apple's this great company. In fact, Apple is like a really vicious company when it comes to their suppliers, okay? They want to transfer your profit to their company, so they're going to just beat up their suppliers on pricing, so you have almost no margin, just enough margin to survive. It's what the railroads did to the farmers out in the West also. Just enough margin to survive and nothing more. So there's always this tension between you and your customer. And then it's also it's a full contact sport, as I like to say. So it's not something you can do part-time, effectively. So if you decide you want to be the CEO, you need to do it all the time. And it might require taking a leave from a faculty position for a few years before you're ready to give up control to somebody else or you sell the company. You can also turn the leadership over to someone else. But here's the thing, it's like marrying somebody so that they can take care of your child. Okay, so there's a lot of risk in here. And you really have to vet out what you're doing with your partner before you really do that. Because if you feel like I do, like you've made an invention, it's going to be useful, it's your child. You want to see it grow and mature and be healthy, and you don't want to turn the keys over to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing or is just like, it's just a job, I'll just move on to the next job if this doesn't work out. Meanwhile, they've completely vaporized your technology in the marketplace. So it's kind of a tension between these two things. Another big thing is, divorce is ugly, by the way, but giving away any appearance of a conflict of interest is like really important. Okay, this is like the quickest way to get in trouble is to not be careful about conflict of interest. That means transparency is important, and it means you have to be really careful what you do. And even though you think it's like, I'm not conflicted, what I'm doing is a win-win situation for everybody, you have to be really transparent about what you're doing so that everybody knows that and they all agree that what you're doing is a good thing, rather than going away thinking you're doing just fine and then all of a sudden something gets blown way out of proportion and you're in trouble. I didn't have that happen to me, but I've seen it happen to other people. I was very careful. I was an Eagle Scout. I feel like those morals really are very helpful when it comes to this sort of thing. So that Business Week article said the project leader and his co-inventors will share in any royalties. That's true. It sounds great, but I'll just point out that no one would have licensed this technology if we hadn't tackled the following things, like innovating the invention at JPL by what innovation means, growing the company to commercialize the technology. You have to deliver on the promises, and the story has to be compelling. Not just like I have a technology that's a little bit better mousetrap, but it has to really be compelling. Like everybody agrees, this is the only technology that can do this important task. Like CCD takes too much power to put in a cell phone. you need to use a CMOS image sensor technology so that you don't kill off the battery in just a few minutes. And you have to sell the company too, so that you can liquidate your stake. And then also Caltech had to then go and assert its patents against all the big companies. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
Okay, so after we sold the company, I worked for Micron for a year. That was the acquirer. Worst year of my life. I told you I am a controlling personality, and having to have somebody else run the company that didn't understand the technology like I did, didn't understand the marketplace like I did, and dang it, did not understand business like I did by that point in time, was really frustrating. Really, really frustrating. I felt I should stay because I'd hired these 135 people, and I needed to kind of like make sure everything was going to be okay for them going forward. But again, talk about non-collegial atmospheres. That the new guy that came in, and what was his position? It was kind of like, I need to be the alpha dog here, and the only way I can be sure I'm the alpha dog is to, well, I don't want to go ahead with that analogy, but anyway, it leaves a mess everywhere, okay? And so it was unpleasant for me, and it took me a year to leave. I retired, bought a house up on Lake Winnipesaukee. That was great. Some other guys from JPL asked me to come back and run their MEMS company. Restarted, actually. They had grown and then retracted down to about 8 or 10 people and didn't need to do a restart. So I came in and did that, regrew that to about 135 people also, as it turns out. I guess that's my limit for companies management. I retired again, but unfortunately I failed at that too. Wound up going to Samsung Electronics as a consultant, which meant flying to Samsung for like a week out of every month, which is a lot of jet lag. And at some point I decided, you know what, I need to go work for something local that's low key. I thought I'd go to Dartmouth, and my plan at Dartmouth was to just part-time job, teach one course a year maybe work with one graduate student. So as you heard, I'm now full professor with full teaching load and full research lab, and then this extra duty, which I foolishly signed up for, which is this Associate Provost job. So I'm a fool. Actually, I love it all. I don't do anything I don't like, but it's been very involved. So my group. So I'm continuing to work on image sensors, thinking about photons and counting photons. So I had this idea back in 2005 when I was running the MEMS company that it'd be nice to have an image sensor where you count every photon as it comes into the sensor one at a time. You just have this binary kind of data of where a pixel was hit by a photon and where it was not hit by a photon, and then do some sort of computational imaging step to create an image from all that raw data. So the vision was 1 billion pixels, or specialized pixels, we call it JOT, on a chip, reading out at 1,000 frames per second with accurate single photon counting capability. So that's a terabit per second, by the way, which is a lot of data, and also consuming less than a watt. So it was a good project for a university because it's so far out there. But we want to solve problems like dynamic range in images and also dim light conditions. Here's just kind of a pictorial. What you do with a CCD or CMOS image sensor is counting kind of rain in a bucket for the photons, and we want to count raindrops now. So pictorial is kind of like we collect this binary data, and then we collect a lot of fields of it at high rate, and then we're going to combine this binary data that's kind of X and Y in time domain and use this to create an image pixel. So we had to wind up inventing a new detector device for doing that. Here's just one example, by the way, that strangely no one's ever done this before, but you can actually see as every electron comes into this detector, you get a very discrete step. So doing this in a solid state, it's like EE 101 in terms of what it is, but actually doing it is the first time that I know of that anyone's been able to do this. Also means that if you count a bunch of them, you can see, well, what can you see here? The fact that this is very quantized, each one is basically 1 photon level, okay? So this is 5 photons or 8 photons or 11 photons. It's very easy to tell how many photons came into the sensor. So that part was successful. It's just fairly recent data. We're using this stacked process. We actually have 2 wafers that are bonded together with a very high density interconnect between them. These are the pixels, these are micro lenses, color filters, detector area, and then some readout electronics, and then some other readout electronics that are connected in this kind of sandwich structure. This is actually our chip. This is a Sony chip that I could take a picture of. We use a similar process, but I'm not allowed to show you a cross-section of that. Built the chip and are actually able to demonstrate what we wanted to do with this single photon detection. That is, we shoot a target scene, which is a leopard face there, and we get binary raw data, photon counting data, and can build up an image from that information. So great. Has lots of interesting applications for this in science, defense, and photography. Turns out it's also a nifty quantum random number generator as well. Turns out to be very important for encryption, to be able to generate random numbers that are truly random. So what did we do? Well, we started a company this last January. So 2 of my Ph.D. students that have graduated are off. We did a little bit of time at the Dartmouth Regional Technology Center up in Hanover, but then they packed up their cars and went to Pasadena to grow the company, because from a fertile ground point of view, New Hampshire is kind of rocky. And there's a lot of sunshine in California. And I said, after all that, it's announced that the Queen Elizabeth Prize in engineering, which is immodest, but it's like the Nobel Prize. There's no Nobel Prize for engineering. It's this prize in engineering. So here's George Smith, CCD Nobel Prize winner, big recognized. Mike Thompson, who was ripped off from that initial Nobel Prize, was also recognized finally. Nobu Teranishi in Japan, who worked in the 80s a lot on CCD technology, and myself. This is a fake picture. Mike doesn't really know how to use the cell phone camera. So here's the real picture that I took. And this is Her Royal Highness Princess Anne. And then in actually just a couple of weeks now, we finally go to Buckingham Palace and get the prize from Queen Elizabeth herself. Okay, just 2 other things I want to mention here. So, you know, we all know this, I think, if you're an inventor. Inventors, we don't always get it right the first time. But, you know, that's not what we teach elementary school kids. We teach them to give the right answer on the test the first time. This is what they're taught. So I'm also a member of the National Inventors Hall of Fame. So we have this program called Camp Invention that my wife and I have been trying to get camps going in New Hampshire. There's about 1,300 camps across the country, but New Hampshire's been underserved in that area. And basically, we teach the kids for a week in the summer, like a different process. Like, you don't get it right the first time. You iterate until you get it right or better. And so they go in, they're elementary school kids, and they get to learn a different set of skills. And then also the elementary school teachers that come in as counselors to this camp in the summer, most elementary school teachers don't know how to teach STEM. Actually, a lot of them are afraid of STEM. So this is a curriculum in a box program that they then, so it's very friendly for the teacher to learn how to teach STEM to the class, but then there's this secondary mission, right? Is now we've taught elementary school teachers how to teach STEM or help them build their skill set. They get to take these things back to the classroom. So in fact, a lot of my prize money is going to support this. Very last thing is I also run the Ph.D. innovation program at Dartmouth. This is where we're training Ph.D. students about entrepreneurship and tech transfer. And so they take the regular Ph.D. program plus some extra courses. And some capstone courses. Capstone course. It's a small program, about 5 students every year. And also they get this extra fellowship with research funding. So it's a pretty unique program in the country. And we're running for a while. We've got about 18 or 20 students because it's a 3-year steady state, 5 students per year, something like that. And the main thing is that they go for their with their advisor for the first 2 years in the normal PhD program. And then after year 2, they start getting this extra fellowship money, and they can kind of go on a different path. They don't have to worry about the deliverables that their advisor has as part of their NIH or NSF funding. They can look at the commercialization or translational aspects of that technology. So, and they also get $10,000 a year of research funding to do that. Okay, I think I am done, so thank you very much.
I think we have time for a couple questions, and we can move the discussion into the network.
Yes.
I was curious about the patents going back to Caltech. Did that make it difficult to sell the company? Because I would have assumed that the company...
No, actually, that was Micron initiated that. That wasn't a requirement of Caltech. Micron said, we don't want to pay any sticking royalties. So what we're going to do is we're part of the deal to go through so Caltech could liquidate its equity stake in our company. So they were motivated. Was Micron said, we want a perpetual, paid-up, non-exclusive license to the technology, and then we'll give you the IP back, and you can license it to other people like Sony or Samsung.
So they were already anticipating that other places were going to rip it off anyway.
It was already happening by that
And they
time.
didn't want to be fighting it.
That's right.
They got the exclusive rights. I see.
Yes.
I noticed in one of your charts that you had the term pin photodiode.
Yes.
And a couple of years ago, I was trying to learn and understand that. And pretty impressive to me. Was that something that...
Somebody should get a prize for that,
Your team
which
did?
Nobu did.
You did?
He was one of those 4 people getting the Queen Elizabeth Prize.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, pretty neat.
Not my invention, though.
Yeah, well, it was his and you worked with him?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, that structure was very useful in CCDs for high performance. And then that was one of the things that worked well about CCDs that we kind of stole to the CMOS technology. So his technology is used both for CCDs and in CMOS image sensors. His technology is used both for CCDs and for CMOS image sensors. So it is a cool device. Yes?
Great talk. Cool device, but not as cool as the data you showed on your new stuff. When do you expect to come out with a product on that?
Well, I'd say there's still,
That's crazy.
we're in it. That's room temperature, by the way, no avalanche.
I looked at that.
Yes, it's kind of,
I worked in nuclear physics for many years and detecting single photon counting with these big...
well, if it's a lot of energy in the photon, it's not so impressive. When it's generating 1 electron, then it's much harder to detect. But thank you. But as far as that company goes, what I'm suggesting to the CEO, I like to control things, but I can't, is that they just find customers that are interested in this technology, seriously interested, do a custom camera that's built around that customer's interests, and then use that what the customer pays for, which might be like $100,000 or something like that, and then use that feedback to further refine the device down the road for that particular application area, if it looks promising, and do that for a few different customers. That's year 1.
I was going to ask you about the new company in terms of you said you like to control things and you're clearly not.
Yes,
So
it's very
so
scary.
what's-
It's just like teaching your kids how to drive a car. It's exactly the same sensation.
So
Like,
what is
you got to
what-
do it, but you don't want to do it.
But why didn't you? You did it before. Why didn't you do it again?
Oh, well, when Soleil came to me and said, we should start a company, I said, no, too much like work. It's like, I know what the stress level is and all that sort of thing, and I didn't want to go through that again. So that's the price of letting go, is not having the same level of stress. So that's really what it is. I've actually had a couple of companies besides the ones I mentioned, and it's stressful. I mean, it's like you want them to succeed, and takes a lot of, it sucks the life out of you. No, I shouldn't say that. That scares everybody. But as I said, it's a full-time job, and you really have to be fully immersed in it and ready to spend the time on it. You can't do like 10 other activities at the same time. There's another question, no? Yes?
I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but there seem to be two different kinds of innovation. One is the straight line engineering innovation of you have this process, you want to take a picture. How do you take a picture better, cheaper, smaller, less energy, and so forth? But then I'm wondering about the kind of innovation that led people to use this in dental work, for instance, or use it, the pill to pass through your intestine to be able to do work that they couldn't do otherwise.
Right.
It's like a brand new application nobody even would have bothered to think about previously. And I'm sure it doesn't just come like that.
Well, those I tried to give credit to those other people who they saw the technology, because it kind of came out in some rags and things about what we were working on, and they looked at it, and they're the ones that connected the dots to a different their own problem, right? So the dental guys were like, wow, CCs are really expensive, and dentists are never going to pay for a big CCD chip. So how can we do this in a cheaper process? And bingo, all of a sudden, there it was. And for the capsule guys, for example, they're like, it's a great idea, but it's burn up the battery long before it goes through your intestines, so we're stuck. And then this unstuck them. So, so there is that level, but that's the good thing about like publishing your results, right? If you're really secretive about your company and try to do it stealth mode, you miss those kind of opportunities that come up that are really important. So that's actually a very good point. So you need to like kind of let people know. And there's also something in the technology area where you need to have peer buy-in, because if I'm an investor and I want to invest in your company, I'm going to come over to somebody else and ask them their opinion of your technology. And if you've been stealthy about it, they're clueless. So they can't get that comfort level. Whereas if they can talk to another expert and find out that, hey, this is really cool, like as you were suggesting, then it makes them much more secure in doing an investment or partnership or something like that. Yes?
The question about while you're working on things like this, how much do you talk to others about what you're doing and in what format that you can do it and without fully losing the idea that you have?
Yeah, it's kind of a fine line. I mean, at Dartmouth, I've kind of changed our IP policy a little bit, that the bar for a provisional patent is very low at Dartmouth. It's like you're writing a paper, you're in a hurry to get it published, but you want to protect your IP. It's like, we'll take your paper, put a cover sheet on it, file it as a provisional patent application. And that gives you a year of protection, at least based on what was disclosed in your paper, to get around to filing a non-provisional, a regular application. But in that year, that's when well, not right away, but as soon as it looks like it's viable, but before the year is up, because you don't want to do everything at the last minute, have our business development people look at that technology and just try to assess it and work with the inventor to see if it's really got the legs that thought it might have. But I just believe the provisional, it used to be in the US that you had a year after you publish a paper to file something. That's gone now. So you need to file this provisional, which costs like $700 or something, right away, protect your rights. And we, as a university, we need to make that as easy as possible for the inventors, so, and fast, because I don't know if how many of you do this, maybe it's just me, but you tend to like wait to the last minute to write the paper. right? So you don't have 2 weeks or something to wait for the Technology Transfer Office to file something. It's got to be pretty quick.
Can I follow it with a very brief question? What is the word paper in this context used for? I mean, how do you define publishing a paper?
Well, in engineering, you go to a conference, to IEEE in my case, but something else, and you have to have a paper with meat in it, right? You have to describe what you've done and kind of how it works, or usually it's not even accepted, but but when you get down to the paper, it's got to be real, or you'll get a bad reputation very quickly.
Our undergraduate research conference at UNH.
Pardon?
Our undergraduate research conference at UNH.
Are we talking about undergraduates now?
Yes.
Okay, so undergraduate is a different story. So at Dartmouth, if you're being paid by the school, Dartmouth owns the IP. So this is graduate students, staff, and faculty for the most part. If you're an undergraduate, it's your IP, and Dartmouth lays no claim to it whatsoever. So we will help the undergraduates. In fact, it turns out that we have donated money that can help with some of that provisional application process for ideas that seem to be like worthwhile protecting. But basically, it still belongs to the undergraduates. If there's a faculty member involved in it, then that changes the story.
How does that change?
Well, Dartmouth will lay claim to the IP. The students are still inventors on it, and if there's any trickle down, they will be participating in the trickle down. Yes.
What experience?
This is the last question, apparently.
Okay.
Better be a good one. No pressure.
Your experiences as a kid, how did that bring you to where you are today?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. I had a chance to do experiential learning as I grew up in Connecticut, and we had something called the Talcott Mountain Science Center, which is in Avon, which was, for me, was a Saturday program that the school paid for me to attend. And that's where I really got my hands on doing things and digging into things. And I would say that was pretty formative for me. The other thing that was really important for me when I was young is I had a paper route. And I swear everything I learned about entrepreneurial thinking came from having a paper route. You have to go out, you have to get customers, you have to collect money. You know, people hide when the paper boy comes to collect money, at least in the old days when they did that. It's like, I can see you through the door, why aren't you? It's like 35 cents, come on, man. I've been like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to deliver your paper. Can't you pay me 35 cents? Anyway, so you learn all that stuff.
You did get the money.
Eventually I did get the money, that's right. But you had to be persistent. You had to keep going back to that house every day, different times. So, thanks for asking that.
Thank you.